Welcome to episode 2 of the Always On podcast, recorded June 15, 2020, at the Executive Briefing Center at Carousel headquarters in Exeter, Rhode Island. I'm your host, Jason Albuquerque, Carousel CIO and CISO. Today we're going to discuss on this episode Verizon's data breach investigation report, the definitive source for annual cybercrime statistics. This is the Always On podcast, where we explore the intersection between technology, security, and the business with the industry's best. All right, so let's kick in here. Having partnered with Verizon for nearly 2 decades, we've helped so many clients with telecommunications needs that are really at the heart of their IT practices. Between network bandwidth, connectivity, modern technology like voice over IP and SD-WAN, we really reference this data report here for cybercrime statistics for our clients and the industry at whole. This is really one of the most read reference data breach reports that are out there today, so I'm super excited to have our guest from Verizon on. Today we have David Grady, who is the security evangelist for Verizon. When he's not speaking about security at industry events, David helps Verizon customers refine and achieve their cybersecurity objectives. He joined Verizon's cybersecurity product and marketing team in 2015. He was at State Street Corporation, where he was the vice president, and he helped build a continuous cybersecurity monitoring program. He was a senior vice president for security and risk at Citizens Bank. He wrote for the Boston Globe and later was the deputy press secretary for 2 Boston mayors. That's absolutely incredible. And he also has a TED Talk on time management, which is viewed 3 million times and translated into 37 languages. So absolute pleasure to have you on here, David. Great to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I think I'm going to have to shorten my bio.
We also have Jason Graff. Jason Graff joined Verizon as a senior consultant. He brings 15 years of customer-facing technical IT experience. Responsible for delivering complex solutions around SaaS and identity and access management. He also installed and managed and secured global VMware SSO demo environment, hosting over 20,000 virtual machines for Verizon. At Verizon now, he's part of a team that acts as security consultants to sales and to the customers in the medium-sized business space. That team's goal is to meet customers wherever they are in the cybersecurity maturity journey and partner with them to go down that path. Thanks so much for joining us, Jason. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
All right.
So we're going to start this off in really 2 sections. Yep, absolutely. Great to have you. So we're going to have 2 segments here today. First off, we're going to kick off at a high-level executive briefing, 30,000-foot view of the DBIR, really talk about the history, the mission, how it's 13 years old, coming of age, and really its progress over time. So Jason, do you really want to give a little bit of the history of the DBIR report, the mechanics of the report, and maybe some things that have changed over the last 13 years?
Yeah, sure. It's a report that, like you said, we've published now going on 13 years. And Verizon has published the data breach investigations report, not just for marketing purposes, but really for information that customers can use and that we share with the industry so we can tackle security issues, not just by how they come in and how they happen, but specifically by vertical and how they apply to each individual entity. So the report has real data from real incidents and real breaches that have happened over the last year across the world. Our latest report takes a look at 32,000 security incidents and a subset of almost 4,000 confirmed data breaches. We have contributors from all over the world, not just technical. We have law enforcement, other security vendors who we partner with, and private companies as well as government agencies who we collect data from. So we take all this information and we break it down and analyze it by industry in order to provide us with actionable insight into what organizations in specific industries can do to defend against cybercrimes. Now, we know that criminals attack hotels in a much different way than they go after retail stores. And they're going to attack a hospital or a manufacturer in a different way than they go after specific government agencies. And in these cases, they also use different tools and different techniques to get the data. So with the insight from this analysis and breakdown, we're able to offer advice to our customers. And we put that insight into the products and the capabilities that we offer. And it really becomes the foundation of our security platform and the foundation of how our customers should manage risk.
No, that's great. I'd be interested in hearing about some of the updates, right? I know this year's report You've changed a little bit of some of the data points that you're bringing in. You've integrated some frameworks and some best practices. What are some of the changes from last year and before to the 2020 DBIR report?
Do you mind if I jump in on that?
Yeah, absolutely, David.
Is that right, Jason? I'm sorry to step on you.
No,
I just want a couple other things too. I wanted to before we get to that.
Sure.
So the report's free. Just want to make sure people know that it's downloadable as a PDF.
Yep.
You can also go to the Verizon Enterprise website and you can scroll through it. So we think that it has a lot of value because you can go through the index version and you can share a URL with somebody who needs to learn more about security in a particular industry. But it is very much free from and free of marketing or product material. And I think that's one of the reasons why the report is so well respected and so well received every year, anticipated, because it is a data-driven report. And as Jason said, it comes from sources from all over the world. Some of the changes this year, I think the big headlines really is the amount of information we were able to collect almost doubled over year to year. So we were able to look at, for a calendar year, a much bigger set of data, both in terms of incidents, which we describe as sort of things that go bump in the night that require real response, as opposed to just a red light blinking. It's not a big deal. The difference between an event and an incident, right? And then from the subset of all those incidents, we have thousands of actual confirmed data breaches, and the number of those were so big that we were able to really get a lot more granular, actually, in the 2020 data breach investigation report. And by that we mean specifically around the vertical industries that we're able to look at. The report every year was usually looking at 9 or 10 of the major industries. And we used the North American industry classification system to break those out. So every year we were looking at finance, or we were looking at manufacturing. This year we were able to almost double the number of industries that we could specifically report on. That's very helpful if you are in not just manufacturing, but you're actually in like construction manufacturing and mining, right? So to get into that, you can start to see it's more than the nuance. It's a data-driven insight that your industry has a different sort of target on its back than in other industries. Some of the visualization is interesting. It always is every year. I always see the team does some incredible work in terms of data visualization, and I also like the fact that it's written in English. It's written in very highly accessible, and I would say it's kind of funny, and it's definitely for humans to consume. Yeah. In addition to security people. What else is new this year? Yeah, so we've also incorporated some mapping to some of the CIS, Center for Information Security controls. Those top 20 controls that we always hear about. It's one thing for the report to say, here's all the things that are happening, and then we always provide some narrative around what you should be looking for, how you respond. But to actually have the report specifically mapped to CIS controls that could help alleviate some of these very specific challenges that report lays out, that takes it to the next level of actionability for people out there.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think having a lot of the results of the report aligned to industry frameworks and best practices is great, right? So, I mean, you said at CIS Top 20, you align the industries to Veris, a MITRE attack framework, right, for the different levels of attack. Mm-hmm. So I think it's great to be able to start correlating that to industry best practice and frameworks. So knowing that, let's take a little bit high level at talking about victims, the attackers, maybe some TTPs, right? Some tactics and things of that nature. So let's look at industry, right? Some of the things that I pulled out were healthcare, financial and insurance. You mentioned manufacturing, right? So for example, like in the healthcare realm, there seemed to be a significant amount of data disclosures, right? I think the highest out of all, with about 798 incidents and 521 confirmed data disclosures. What are your thoughts around the healthcare industry? Is that something that's highly under attack these days? And do you foresee it continuing that way?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons that the number's so high is because of the pressure to report and the compliance obligations that they're under for HIPAA and other things, including the new California Consumer Privacy Act. So the onus is on them to really be diligent about reporting. So I think that's why we saw the number. Before I talk about healthcare and some of the things that you saw, I just want to go back to, you mentioned Veris. And for the folks who don't understand what Veris is, if I may for a minute, So VERIS is a framework that Verizon actually developed and maintains, and it's the vocabulary for event recording and information sharing. And it's a pretty cool tool because that makes it easier. Imagine the team trying to build a DBIR every year, with people sending in notes and on the back of napkins, all their data that's going to be completely unstructured, right? The VERIS framework talks about specific things, right? It talks about the actors, internal actor, external actor. Is it a nation state? Talks about the assets that they go after. Are they going after a server? Are they going after an endpoint? Are they going after a database or whatever, a web application? Talks about the action they took, right? So you can think about brute force. Or was it hacking, or was it a DDoS attack, or what was the action that they took? And then it talks about the attribute too. So you look at the integrity of the data, or is it the availability of the system, or is it the confidentiality? So the VERIS framework not only allows for the collection and the submission and collection of the data, but it's also a framework for us to talk about it. So when you say what happens in healthcare, and you look at the DBIR for healthcare pages are going to say that the actors were the following. And you're going to see that there's a close to even split between internal and external actors. This is the first year in a long time in the DBIR that we've seen internal actors in healthcare go down below 50%. For the longest time, internal actors were more than 50. It was the only industry that we saw then. It's a pretty close split. So we know that the actors, right? We talk about the assets that they go after in the report. We talk about the actions they took and the attributes and such. In healthcare, there's a lot going on right now. Clearly, as we said, the reporting obligations are really high. But the data that's in healthcare systems is incredibly valuable, right? It's highly monetizable. When you think about fraud, there's a certain percentage of the breaches, HIPAA violations and such that are out of curiosity or fun. Is my ex significant other still in rehab, and I want to go check out or who's that rock star who just got into our hospital? I want to look at their files, right? So it really comes down to, for a lot of the problems in healthcare. And again, this maps to the CIS controls have to do with access control and identity access management, making sure that you have the privileges, high-end privileges not being abused, right? And the monitoring to make sure that people are going to the repositories that they need to. But there's another element too in healthcare I think that's important to talk about, and that's the external, right? Obviously, you have to be watching out for external bad guys, and there's a lot of that sort of monetization opportunities, as I said. But there's another sort of a nuance, which is the partner thing. So increasingly, healthcare is all about the ecosystem. HIMSS, the Health Information Management conference that got canceled this year because of COVID, they were talking this year, what was the buzzword of the year going to be? It was going to be ecosystem, partner ecosystem. And healthcare has so many partners that are touching their systems, or they're giving data out to third parties to process and to manage and such, that that if you don't have your eye on the ball for the security posture of those partners, then them as an actor can cause trouble.
No, so that makes sense. I mean, it shines a light on third-party, fourth-party vendor risk management, right? At that point, very important.
Yeah, Jason, do you deal with any healthcare organizations?
We do. We have lots of organizations that are our clients in the healthcare space, and I'm heavily involved in their due diligence, right? Doing the third-party vendor risk assessments, working with Carousel, making sure that we meet their standards, we meet their controls, as that third-party vendor. So yeah, I mean, our healthcare organizations partner with us, and pretty much every year we're going through some level of vendor risk assessment.
I tell you, just last thing about that is I think healthcare has been, from my perspective, the most aggressive in terms of digital transformation, maybe one of the most, and embracing all these new ways of doing business, to compete better, to cut costs, and to touch the customer or patients more readily through telemedicine and such. But at the same time, most of the healthcare organizations that I talk to are struggling with the basics. So there's a bigger story here in most industries about using this kind of data to really get your house in order and the foundation strong before you can try to advance your company.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. And now a lot of organizations struggle with the basics, right? That basic cyber hygiene of we'll talk about it later on, but simply knowing your assets. You can't protect what you don't know you have, right? I mean, at the end of the day, and that's a key piece to this report is there's a section about assets and how it identifies lack of asset management as some of the risk, right?
Mm-hmm. It's always been the number one control, right?
Right. All right, so we talked about healthcare. The next that I saw, a significant number on was financial and insurance, right? That was an industry that had, close to the level of data disclosure, had twice the amount of incidents than healthcare.
Again, it's a highly, regulated, and they have the obligations to report. But I can't remember who the bank robber was, but back in the 20s, they asked him, "Why do you rob banks?" He goes, "That's where the money is," right?
Right.
So, financial service institutions obviously have, a lot of opportunities to try to do fraud, and you see wire fraud right now. Yeah. I'm actually in the middle of a real estate transaction right now personally, and I cannot believe the number of warnings I'm getting about wire fraud. Right, so there's a real high understanding of that risk. Also, financial service industries can be the target of campaigns for the sake of, for DDoS, because hacktivists, right, are, we saw this back in the Occupy Wall Street days, right? And you still see that, you still see organizations like that being hacked for that reason. But that's where the money is. So you're going to see it.
Yeah, I mean, the next ones I had in line were manufacturing, the information services vertical, public administration, organizations like mine, where we're professional technical services type organizations, and then education services. I mean, we've seen a lot of these on the news. We've seen a lot of the data breaches on the news. So we know these are target verticals that folks have been going after. In the industries, were there any surprises to you? Any industries that kind of popped out as a surprise that they were heavily under attack?
No, because everybody's under attack all the time. Right. But I think that, the number wasn't particularly huge around cyber espionage, but I think you're going to see more of that. And we're going to be taking a look at that more this year. Jason Graff, when you talk to our customers, do they have a good feel for the value of their intellectual property as opposed to, the customer data? Do they realize that that's a third rail for them if they don't have good protections in place?
Some do and some don't. I even recently came across somebody who wanted to add that as a policy to their incident response plan because they realized that was an issue. And I think a lot of our customers, for the most part, they talk about DLP, data loss protection. But then intellectual property is something that is often an afterthought, and that security providers like us help them think about.
Yeah. What do you think's the reason around that? You think it's got to do with compliance and regulation, where they're a little bit more heavy-handed when it comes to PII, PHI, things of that nature, and intellectual property probably isn't under the under the target or under the microscope as much as that sensitive information would be?
Absolutely, and the fact that when you go to security seminars or when you read about security just in general articles on the web, they'll always just talk about personal information, but unless you're reading about a law firm or how law firms help certain customers with breaches, you don't really read about intellectual property until it's too late. And that just falls into one of the buckets of some things that, customers don't always think about until it's too late, because not everybody has the budget to touch every little piece. They kind of just do things piecemeal as they go to cover themselves as they need.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I mean, intellectual property is an important piece of business. It's how organizations make their money, drive revenue, right? So a focus on that is definitely important.
And you asked about manufacturing, and that's where we saw a pretty big piece of cyber espionage. About 27% of the breaches were rolled back to that. And I mean, again, that's a highly competitive thing, and some of it is nation state backed. You've seen that. Some of it is literally the old school, cyber espionage. But we've heard case studies, and we've all heard the stories over the years about, airplane manufacturers having their designs stolen or secret formulas stolen and such, right? So I think that in all industries, which are increasingly, dealing like with the brands have, intellectual property behind them. They need to recognize that stuff is just as valuable as, personal customer data that they need to protect.
Yeah. So at a high level, gentlemen, what do you think some good benefits or takeaways for business leaders are, right? I mean, we talk about here on this podcast that, we're the intersection between technology, security, and the business, right? So talking to executives, whether they be an IT executive, a security executive, or a business executive, a CFO, a CEO, a CRO, what are some key benefits and takeaways that you think, the executive team should be taking a look at this report and diving deeper into it?
I'm going to go first and then ask Jason to jump in too. But I think this report is really valuable for information security teams and other risk people to share with those other C-level folks that you said, people who are stakeholders in the security program, for a number of reasons. One is it helps them understand not just the complexity, so they're overwhelmed and they throw their hands up, but the specific complexity that the security team is facing, that we are constantly under attack by these specific things, and it makes it real. So go from the abstract to the, we need to watch out for DDoS, because in our industry, the availability of our systems is critical to us being able to make our money every month or every week, right? We need to stay online, but we're always under attack. So we need to talk to you as in the business line manager. You need to understand what your role is in helping us mitigate DDoS, right? It's not just a technical problem per se. The report, I think, is really helpful for helping C-level people understand. I always talk about what's more likely to happen than what could happen. And when you talk about the possibilities of security attacks, cyber attacks, it gets overwhelming, it gets abstract, and then it's just somebody else's job. It's too much. But when you have data like this that shows the specific, the top 3 in the last year proven across the world in our industry, then you can look at what's more likely. And then you can start to take a risk-based approach to your security program and not try to play whack-a-mole, right? And try to do everything. If you try to do everything, you're going to end up doing nothing. But if you put 80% toward the 100% of the things that you see in the DBIR, you're probably going to have a much better risk-based approach to your program and maybe some more ROI. I think it's a great report to share around inside and outside the organization. Jason, what about you? How do you use the DBIR when you're counseling customers on their security?
Well, I tell you summed it up very well, but what I would add to that is visibility. I talk a lot about visibility with customers because, products, professional services, those things are important, but how do you know that they're all working, whether you buy them from Verizon or another provider, or if they're homegrown and organic and they're built by your own entity? The best way to do that is with some of the things that we have, like cyber risk monitoring, which is basically a portal that gives IT leaders visibility. And that way they're prepared. So if executive leadership says, how do we know all this is working, that we've invested all this time and money in? So you'd be able to quickly show them in the form of one screen, one pane of glass, how the org is doing in the form of a credit score. That's really their cybersecurity score, using all that information that we've gathered from the data breach investigations report.
Very good. So speaking of that, let's take a little bit of a deeper dive. Let's go on to a deeper dive segment here where we can talk about some of the results and analytics a little bit more in depth. So let's start with year-over-year analysis, right? So one of the pieces of the deeper that I actually really liked was taking a look at that year-over-year analysis. Now that you've had the coming of age, you're 13 years old with this investigation report. I think having that timeline is very, very beneficial. So let's talk about some of the items that have been ramping up over time, and maybe some of those items that have been slowing down.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because over time, that gives us an advantage. We've got a good 10, 12, 13-year view, right? So you do see the things that come and go. And everything comes and goes into fashion, right? Some things stay constant, right? It's like literally in fashion. We saw, clearly we're seeing ransomware being a constant lately, right? And the report really gets into sort of the umbrellas of malware, crimeware, ransomware, and how they're all different. DDoS continues to be a very significant issue for organizations in all industries. Some of it is directed, some of it's opportunistic, and that we see that year after year after year. One thing that there's a chart in there, and I'm sorry we can't show it to you, but we can describe it. It looks like a subway train line. Jason, I think that's how you described it, right?
Yep.
And it looks like the map to the London subway system. And what it talks about is how over the last X number of years, and I'm just going to pull it up here so I can look at it, between 2015 and 2020, we've seen that the use of Trojans has gone up and then it's gone way down, right? You see that malware has stayed pretty consistent. There's one that's really, I think, interesting, and it's not a technical one. That's errors, right? Now, can we talk about errors for a few minutes? Because we've seen error and misdelivery, which literally is a fat finger or sending it to the wrong person, is a constant. Error includes things like fax machines, and I still can't believe that particularly medical. I don't know. Do you see this when you in your personal life? Fax this information over to us. Who uses a fax machine anymore? And quite honestly, I draw from my own personal life. I was trying to do some stuff from one of my kids to get a doctor's referral, and they wanted me to fax the information over, and I found a local place to fax it to them, and of course it went missing. They never found it. So I actually hand delivered it. Took a day off to hand deliver it because it got misdirected. So, but it had personal information in it, right? So we see errors as a constant over year after year. And I think that speaks to the need for organizations to look at the people and the process part of security, right? And not just the technology. I mean, sure, you can put DLP in to make sure that it's going to the right place or that it scans for outbound stuff. But if you have business processes that are very manual, paper intensive, right? That aren't particularly straight through, that rely on faxes or emails, right? Do you have that secure portal to exchange the sensitive information? Are you sending stuff in the clear, right? So errors definitely is an opportunity for, as I said, those VPs who are running business lines to step up and contribute to the overall risk mitigation by looking at those processes.
Yeah, I mean, I pulled that same thing out of it, David. You broke errors into two different sections, right? So you had misdelivery and misconfiguration was another. I was very surprised that it went up by 4.9% on the misconfiguration side, but it definitely supports the fact that as business unit leaders, we need to be thinking about process, procedures, standard operating procedures, guidelines, really enforcing those best practices and making sure they're being implemented. And hey, by the way, maybe some quality assurance along the way, right? So it really leans into that whole DevSecOps mentality where you're integrating security into that entire life cycle, whether it be configuration of equipment, development of applications, whatever that case may be, implementations of technologies. Having your security team embedded in those best practices and standard operating procedures and guidelines is incredible. I mean, that's probably one of the main reasons why it's gone up 4.9% on the misconfiguration side is because more organizations need to follow that DevSecOps model and include security teams up front.
Yeah, it is kind of shocking that it continues to happen year after year and still goes up. A lot of that has to do with cloud migration, I think. You're seeing misconfigured applications up there. You're seeing big databases being put up there with a universal read. To set up maybe some default that they didn't fix, right? Two-factor authentication not being implemented, which is really not really a misconfiguration, but it's a bad choice. But I mean, to your point, a lot of organizations don't have that proper governance in place or that toll-gating process, right? And before they go into production to make sure that that's not going to happen. And that is so important. And again, you can use this report, the DBIR, to make the business case for investment in the people and the process and or the technology to bring in that sort of governance and the DevSecOps idea, right? To say if we spend X on that, we're going to see a major reduction in our configuration errors, right? So again, this document isn't about best practice. This document is about data that proves the point you're trying to make.
Exactly. Yeah. What about some of the items that went down? Were there any surprises there? I mean, I know there were quite a few different, actors and threats that have gone down. Any surprising one? I mean, for me, what came out surprising was stolen creds. I figured that would have gone up and not down.
Yeah, I am too, actually, but it's still high.
100%, 100%.
Yeah, but I think that with two-factor authentication, you're seeing that
it's been protecting. Yeah,
so that's going to be less of a thing you want to do.
Right.
What else do we see here? The stolen. What's interesting is happening at the payment system level, right? The swiping level.
Right.
And we have other reports too. If I can talk about that for a minute.
Sure.
Verizon's really put a lot of time and energy into this kind of thought leadership and this research. So the data breach investigation report is our annual report. But we also have a couple of other ones that are, again, they're free and they're downloadable and they're filled with data and there's no advertising in them. But we do a report on the payment security system, payment security report we do every year, because we're one of the biggest PCI auditors and out there. We do a lot of QSA work, and we take the information that we get and the insight from all that payment data, payment system compliance data. And what we found is two things: it's very easy to, well, not easy, but you can work really hard to comply with PCI standards, but it's very hard to maintain them. But what we did see too in this report, and that is that ever since they started with the chip and the PIN, you've seen a lot less of the data theft at the pump or at the point of sale. So that was a good news story that technology actually helped.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's great. All right, so let's take a little bit deeper dive, because this was an interesting point to me too on small to medium businesses, right? And the question in the report was, does size matter, right? And you know, you take a deeper dive and say, hey, listen, has you know, the push for data for digital transformation, the push to the cloud, you know, the new modern technologies that are cloud based, has this really evened the playing field out between the two? Because, you know, historically there's been a gap, right, where larger organizations were higher targets, but I think over the course of the last decade or so, that gap's been closing in very quickly. So does size matter?
Oh yeah. No, actually it doesn't, because the playing field is really leveled.
Right.
I did not write that question. No, well, you know, to your point, the perception was that SMBs would be less of a target, right? What do I have of interest to them? But this year in the report, we saw that the numbers on both sides of the column, if you look at the number of breaches and the actors involved, very similar patterns there, and that is because. I guess part of it's a numbers game. There's a lot of small businesses out there. There's a lot of doorknobs to try to, you know, loosen, right? See which ones are going to pop open a door. But increasingly, you know, even small businesses are moving to the cloud. They're going to SaaS, right? And that means that the bad guys are able to, you know, use that vector to get in and steal what they can. So yeah, if you put those two numbers side by side, large and small, it really blows up the myth that I don't have to worry about this because I'm not, you know, the bank of the universe, or that I'm not, you know, the world's biggest real estate company. I'm just a mom and pop shop. And mom and pop shops, you know, and we know, Jason Graff, you know that when companies get hit, if they even financially survive, they take such a beating with their the brand loyalty, right? Their customer loyalty. Yeah, and I was going to ask Jason Graff that because he's closer to the customer than I am. Jason, when you talk to customers, do they recognize, you know, if they can't afford security, they can't afford a breach?
Well, it's kind of us to educate them on the cause and effect of those things, and also educate them on the effects of what could happen reputation-wise, because I think the reputation piece is something that's very overlooked. Customers feel that if they have a breach, if they were to go out of business, it's because they're going to be sued for losing information and that sort of thing. But, you know, reputation could be damaged pretty immediately, because customer of the breached customer isn't going to really care about where that breach took place, if it was another vendor's responsibility or a third party was holding personal information. They've got to realize that they're the ones that need to take responsibility up front and think about that reputation out of the box before it happens. And again, it's part of my job to educate them on that sort of thing.
No, 100%. And I think one of the last statistics I've seen, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was something around 60% of organizations don't survive a major breach. You know, their businesses cannot survive it, whether it's through, you know, the financial hit, the reputational hit, lawsuits, whatever the case may be, you know, the litigation around it. I think the last I saw was about 60%. So that's pretty significant.
Yeah, hey, let's talk a little bit more about the SMB versus large. I got the slide up here. I haven't quite committed it to memory, so I'll squint and share some numbers with you. You know, what a lot of the similarities were in the actor motives and the actual threat actors, right? So in both small and large businesses, we define small as fewer than 1,000 employees, and large as more than 1,000 employees, just for context. But we saw like the threat actors in small business are 74% external, and in large it's 79% external. So organizations, both large and small, need to have you know their line of sight on what's coming at them from the sides and right directly at them. But in small businesses, about 26% were internal actors. Again, that could be people doing it on purpose, people doing it because they're stealing stuff. It could be taking emailing information home because they're going to go into competition with you next week and they're taking all the trade secrets with them. Or it could be that guy who sends you know, all the information to their Gmail account so they can work on it over the weekend, and they're sending all the stuff in the clear that's going to get compromised. That they shouldn't be doing it around. It's those workarounds too, right? But we're seeing that similarity between the actors in large and small. The motivation is usually about money in both. So you get 79% in large and 83% in small. And then I always like fun. You ever see when you read the report, it says one of the motivations is fun.
Right.
So I think that goes down to the thrift kitties and people who are just going around trying to do what they can. But some of it is also like revenge. Sometimes we see that. So there's a lot of similarities there. But and another similarity too is the credentials being the stuff that's stolen, the data that's compromised in large and small. It's about the credentials. The credentials are the keys to the kingdom, and you need to have the controls in place. And again, the report talks about some of the controls that you can implement to mitigate that risk. But obviously, the body of the size of the data for those two is different. We had almost 8,600 incidents and 576 confirmed data breaches in large, and we had a fraction of that in small. I think over time we'll probably grow that body of insight.
Right. Yeah, I mean, moral of the story is everybody's at risk. If you're a small business, you're at just as much risk as a large business these days because the attacks are king. These malactors, they want your data. They're holding you hostage. So everybody's at risk these days. So pay attention, small businesses, medium businesses, because it's a level playing field now. So deeper into the industries, right? I noticed a lot of trends across different industries from let's say from a data perspective. Very high numbers on personal data theft, even in the healthcare arena, the financial arena. I was very surprised that actually that PII type information was more involved in data disclosures than industry specific information like PHI or financial data. It's pretty amazing, that trend.
Yeah, and again, I think part of the report talks a little bit about this. Again, part of it is that the obligations to report and sort of self-report these things have gone up much more. So it's a lot harder for organizations to sweep the stuff under the rug or say, oh, I didn't realize I had to report that within 30 days or 15 days. But I think it also sort of speaks to how data, right, personal data has become, the DNA or the lifeblood or whatever metaphor you want to use of businesses of all types, right? And it's the big data, it's the analytics that they're doing that you wouldn't think, they need all that. But when you think about some of the data that organizations are collecting through the apps, right, that they might be supporting for their business, all of a sudden they've got a whole bigger world of data. I started information security in an operational manner about 10 years ago, and I was a newbie, and I transitioned from public relations of all things, how I did that. But I learned it over time, and it was very different 10 years ago than it is today. It was perimeter based, and you sort of knew where your data was, and sort of had a defined set of risks, and you went by best practice. And we are in a completely different epoch of business, as you all know, and the way the IT and all the data analytics, it changes the game. And the security professionals, I think, who have been challenged, I'll say just to keep up, but they're under resourced, or who has really time to learn more about this stuff. They get so much to do, and then all of a sudden you wake up one day and you've got cloud and IoT and 5G and AI and ML and blockchain, and you're saying, oh my God, I got to learn all this stuff too. So personal data, I think, is a reflection of where the industry is going.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, we mentioned it before, a lot of it's financially motivated, right? I mean, in healthcare, it was 88% financially motivated, right? So, I mean, I think that's something that goes across pretty much every vertical. It's a moneymaker. So, I'm looking at these cyber threat actors, and they're running businesses on their side, which is pretty scary.
Oh yeah, it is a business, and so much of the stuff that they have, their tools are off the shelf, as we know. It's a malware as a service. It's misinformation or disinformation as a service. It's amazing that you can go into dark web store and grab like a app store and grab a DDoS kit, or grab
you go buy some ransomware.
Yeah, boom.
Yep. Easily at the fingertips these days. Let's talk a little bit about the threat actors. There was some pretty nice reporting in there. About the different types of threat actors, some myths in there that I noticed about, cyber espionage versus your traditional hackers, things of that nature. But you had mentioned earlier, external obviously is definitely high on the radar. Financially motivated, high on the radar. But then you start looking at it from who, right? The organized crime, the nation states, internal folks. So let's talk a little bit about the who of these cyber threat actors.
Yeah, we have a team at Verizon that does the rapid response. We do about 500 investigations every year. A lot of the people who find themselves in a world of trouble weren't our customers, and then they become our customers after we help them put that fire out. But we do a lot of those investigations, and it's really given us a lot of insight over the years into your point about who those people are. And we work with law enforcement too, federal and state. And yeah, you've probably been to a conference or two where it opens with a guy from the FBI or the Secret Service or something. And they break down how these organized crime rings, we're taking money out of ATMs and such. And it sounds like something out of a bad 80s movie or maybe a bad 90s movie. But it's true. There is that sort of organized crime that's out there. And I think that makes a case for viewing like dark and deep web monitoring as a necessity and not a luxury. Now, we barely have resources to do, most organizations barely have resources to do patching, right? Vulnerability testing and do the patching, and those hygiene things that slip aside. But if you can't do it yourself, I think finding a partner who can look at the dark web, deep web for indications of campaigns against you is going to give you a leg up. It's going to give you an advanced warning that you are potentially the subject of an organized crime piece. I mean, you can see, a coordinated effort. You can see credentials for sale, on the dark web in the marketplaces. You can see brand mentions, which is scary, and that can certainly add a lot of visibility into your program. But the myth of the hoodie. If I ever see another hoodie in a PowerPoint presentation,
I agree.
I lose my mind. To get past that, because it's not that. And you're right, it is nation state. We saw that with a certain country on the other side of the world. If you're in the U.S., it's over there, and it went after a movie studio. Those who make the headlines, but also it's the inadvertent one. It's the inadvertent ones, right? We talked about third party, and we all know the story about the very big retailer who got hacked through their HVAC system because the third party vendor didn't have the controls in the firmware, et cetera, right? And again, those are the go-to stories that we tell customers when we're in a sales thing. But I think that when you use data like this from the DBIR, it helps people who make decisions around security get past those headlines and get past those sort of fear, uncertainty, doubt. We don't go at the story. The stories help illustrate a point, but I think that in the industry, I'm kind of rambling here, but in the industry out there in IT and security, the level of sophistication and awareness has grown, I think, to a point where you can get past the hackers and the hoodies and the scare tactics and the keep talking about those major brands that get hit 5 years ago. You can always name the big box stores that get hit, right? And to really start to take it to, that you need to protect your data. Let's talk about the stuff that's specific to your industry, specific to your risk profile, and specific to your risk appetite. This DBIR gives you some of that data to start that risk appetite conversation, I think. That's really important.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, it makes it hit home for organizations, right? It shows that they really have to put some skin in the game because others just like them, have fallen victim, and that's really it, right? I mean, in the past, many organizations have said, what's in it for me? I'm not going to get hacked. That myth of it's never going to happen to me. Well, reports like this year over year show it will happen to you, right? You do have very high risk of threat actors coming at your organization on a daily basis. So, stepping up and shoring up your posture, using information like this to get vertical specific information, so that way you can look at impact, urgency, and like you said earlier, likelihood of an attack, so you can make good risk decisions for your organization and really protect your organization. Because again, every vertical is different, but every business within a vertical is different. They have different risk appetites, right? So really taking this information and making it yours, I think, is incredibly beneficial, for our customers, your customers, and organizations as a whole.
There's those cliches that you always hear, but there's always some truth in cliches, right? They say there's two types of businesses: those who have been hacked and those who don't know they've been hacked, right?
That's right.
You roll your eyes and you say, "I've heard that 100 times," but there is some truth in that, right? And then they also say, what's the other one that they always use about?
It's not a matter of.
It's not if it's when.
Yeah.
It's not if, it's when. Right. That's another one. Another go-to one. Right.
Yep.
Absolutely. And if you think about those messages not in a you're trying to market to me way and trying to scare me way, but really as like a fundamental truth, right? And the idea of it's those who know and haven't, those who've been hacked and those who don't know it. The DBIR really talks about, there's this great statistic in there about detection time, and I hope we can talk real quick about detection time. Last year's number in the DBIR was shocking. It was like 56% of organizations takes weeks, months, sometimes more than a year, up to a year, to find out that they've been hacked or compromised, right? This year we saw it go down to 28, I believe, which is a significant milestone. But think about this, 28%, 56%, doesn't matter. I always equate it to this. Somebody breaks into your house and you're not there, right? They break into your house. They're going to try and get in as fast as they can. They're going to go into the bathroom, look for the drugs. They're going to open your drawers, look for some money or creepy things or whatever. They're going to try and find your electronics, and they're going to get the hell out as fast as they can, right? Now imagine someone breaks into your house in your home, and they stay for 8 months, and you can only just see them out of the corner of your eye, or you can't even really see them. It's the invisible man, right? Like, where'd the spoons go? Right? Where'd my jewelry go? And it just keeps happening. To have somebody in your system for weeks and months and up to a year and not be detected is a real red flag. And the DBIR shows that. Now, again, the number has gone way down. And I think that speaks to a couple of things. It speaks to sort of the evolution of managed detection response tools, right, and endpoint detection response tools, and the recognition that we need to automate more of this detection and remediation, right, just do a better job there. But it also speaks to the need for preparedness and that inevitability thing. So if going on too much, tell me to stop. But we did another report last year called the VIPR report. It's the Verizon Incident Preparedness or Readiness Report. And what it did is it looked at several hundred engagements that we did with customers looking at their incident readiness reports, right? So marry this to this data point. 28% of organizations takes months or a year to find out they've been compromised. Once they do, holy moly, this is bad.
Right.
Do they have a plan to respond to it, right? We looked at several hundred incident response plans from real customers over a couple of years. And not the vast majority, but more than half of the organizations hadn't even tested their plan in the previous year.
Wow.
And they hadn't engaged with the people who are part of the plan, who are in it, who maybe are like the head of HR or the head of legal or the head of privacy or whatever. They weren't engaged in any kind of a meaningful way. So they get caught off guard, and then they don't even have a plan. So, I'm an advocate for downloading these reports, again, not because they're filled with our advertising, but they're filled with really good insights. You marry the VIPR report with our insider threat report that looks at insider threat, and then the DBIR. You've got a pretty good arsenal of information, not just for you as a security person, but again, to use these things to educate, your stakeholders in the organization and to make risk-based decisions. Yeah.
And the scary part, looking at the timeline is, still, from the breaches that you've investigated, a quarter of them were months in the discovery process, right? So, that was a quarter of the breaches that you investigated. So that's a scary number, right? So, like you mentioned, having someone in your network for months at a time and you don't even know about it, that's definitely something that should be concerning. And really, have organizations start to think about those basics, right? A lot of it comes down to basics. One of the big things that I took out of the report too was there was an uber focus on the lack of asset management in some of these breaches, right? How organizations aren't doing the fundamental things they need to be doing to make sure they have visibility into all of the assets in their network. So, for me, that's, you can't protect what you don't know you have. So that was a key piece for me coming out of this is, make sure you could have a good asset management program, a good vulnerability management program, and really shore up a lot of those basics.
Jason Graff, I bet you've talked to a lot of customers who have they have registries of their asset registries, right? They have lists of other lists of other lists. Do you see customers struggling with that fundamental principle that they don't even know what they need to protect?
Absolutely. Very often when we engage customers to start talking about the first steps, if it's a penetration test, I think in at least half the cases where they're going down the road for the first time to do a deep dive penetration test, they're not aware of all these things. And that's what they'll tell us. They'll say, well, we need to start by finding what we have. We don't even know what all of our assets are. In a DevOps environment, that can be really dangerous because You've got the DevOps folks that have administrator and root access, and then the IT administrators don't really know what they're doing, and they don't really have a control over things like their virtual sprawl. So yeah, there's definitely a disconnect in organizations because they think they have asset management in place, but there are so many holes.
Right. Yeah. Yet another reason why to involve the security team in all of these projects and initiatives right out of the gate. So that way there's visibility into the net new assets, net new technologies, new development. Now you're able to actually start building that asset database from a security perspective. Yeah, it's definitely a struggle.
Not to beat a dead horse, I was going to say, but again, the report does pull out some of those key CIS controls and explains how they go back to this data. But it's sad. I mean, it's like yelling at your kids, brush your teeth, and then you only get a floss.
Right.
Yeah, I did. They never did. They never do. And then part of that is time, and part of that is resources, and part of that is really fire drill that gets in the way.
No, absolutely. All right, so gentlemen, any key takeaways, golden nuggets for the audience here that they can use this report for to take back to their peers, to their teams, to the business?
Well, for me, I think it has great value operationally for a security team to either validate or sort of fine tune and balance their program to make sure they're focusing on the right things and the right amount. Again, I think it's a great tool for organizations to use to educate their people, as I said. But I also think as we double the number of industries that we're providing some insight into, I think it's helpful for that third-party risk management view that is increasingly important to companies. If you are in healthcare and you are increasingly working with a manufacturer as a side hustle or something, or you're getting into production of drugs or something, if you're going to buy or work closely with them, you might have never thought about the security risks or threats against that industry before because you've always thought about healthcare and you understood health risks. But if you start to partner with other ventures that are in other industries, you can start to get some insight into the risks and the real threats against them in this report, and then you can challenge them on, hey, are you aware of this stuff? Does your program map to this? Instead of just saying send me your SOC 2 or something and we're all good. Yeah. I think that's got some utility as well. I don't know, Jason, do you have anything you want to add to how customers are using this thing?
No, I think you hit it right on the head with what you were just speaking on, because I find with healthcare I had this happen twice where they weren't looking at things from a perspective of what's happening to other people in the same industry, and they weren't looking at the manufacturing data related to healthcare and that sort of thing. I had a couple of organizations that one was a ransomware breach and the other ended up being a denial of service attack. So it really made them think about, what we have to look at on a regular basis because we are who we are. And then also at the same time, they have to think outside the box that even though we're focused on healthcare and things specific to that vertical, we still need to worry about end users and reputation and credential theft.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. I think being able to look across verticals, equally sized organizations, and be able to bring back that data and use it for your own culture and your own security posture is huge. It's just a huge piece of information. And David, like you said, combine that with other sources of information, right? The other Verizon reports that are out there and statistics that are out there for the whole. Once you combine that together, you can get some really, really good context for your security posture and your security team and your business as a whole, honestly.
I just want to give a shout out. I just want to give a shout out to the Verizon team that wrote this report. So Jason and I here to sort of represent it and paraphrase it for them. They're busy already working on the 2021 report. And I'm not even kidding. I think they took a few days off, they all fell down, and then they climbed back up and they started writing again. But it's an incredible team. It takes a lot of people to develop this report. And we appreciate your interest in it and helping us share the value of it with folks.
100%. I mean, it really is why it is considered the definitive source for cybercrime statistics every year. Every year, I look forward to the report coming out and taking that information and building some context for our organization and our clients. So gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today on our second episode of the Always On podcast series. For our guests and our listeners, if you want more information about this or any other, please go to carouselindustries.com/events, and you can join us for our podcasts. You can join us for our webinars and any other events that we may be having. So thank you, everybody, for joining us.